I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee when I saw the white Lexus crawling up my driveway like a shark circling prey. The morning fog was still hanging over the pine trees surrounding my property in Mountain View, Colorado, and I knew whoever was driving that spotless vehicle was about to ruin my peaceful Saturday morning. The car door opened, and out stepped a woman in her mid-40s wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She had that haircut, you know the one, blonde highlights with aggressive layers that screamed middle management energy. Her heels were completely impractical for my gravel driveway. "Excuse me, are you the owner of this property?" she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I set down my coffee mug on the railing of my cabin porch. "That would be me. Can I help you?" She pulled out a folder from her oversized designer purse and started marching toward me, her heels clicking against the gravel. "My name is Patricia Thornberry, and I am the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. I have received numerous complaints about your structure here." I looked at my cabin, the same cabin my grandfather built with his own hands in 1952. The logs were still solid, the foundation was rock steady, and every board had a story. Complaints about what exactly? Patricia stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, refusing to come any closer, like my cabin might give her some kind of disease. "This wooden structure is in direct violation of our community standards. According to our HOA charter, all structures must be built with approved materials, and wood is explicitly banned due to fire hazards." "Fire hazards," I repeated slowly, looking around at the thousands of pine trees surrounding us. "We're in the middle of a forest," her face tightened. "That is precisely why we have these regulations. The HOA was established in 2019 to maintain property values and ensure safety standards across all residential properties in the Whispering Pines development." I leaned against the porch railing, trying to process what I was hearing. "Lady, I think there has been some kind of mistake. This cabin was built in 1952. My grandfather constructed it himself. I have the original deed and property records going back over 70 years. Patricia flipped open her folder with the practiced efficiency of someone who loved paperwork more than human interaction. "According to our records, this property at 447 Timber Ridge Road falls within the boundaries of the Whispering Pines HOA. All properties within these boundaries are subject to our regulations, regardless of when they were constructed. You have 30 days to bring this structure into compliance or face demolition." "Demolition?" I stood up straight, my coffee forgotten. "You cannot be serious right now." "I am entirely serious, mister." She paused, looking at her papers. "Carter, Jake Carter. And I am telling you right now, you are not demolishing anything. This property predates your HOA by almost 70 years. I never signed any agreement to join your association, and frankly, I did not even know you existed until you showed up here." Patricia's lips pursed into a thin line. "Ignorance of the regulations does not exempt you from following them. The Whispering Pines HOA has legal authority over this entire development, including your property. If you refuse to comply, we will take legal action." She thrust a packet of papers at me. I took them, mostly out of shock. "You are being formally notified of the violation. The 30-day compliance period begins today. Good morning, Mr. Carter." She turned and walked back to her Lexus, somehow managing to make it look dignified despite nearly twisting her ankle twice on the gravel. I watched her drive away, then looked down at the papers in my hand. The top page had the Whispering Pines HOA logo, some pretentious design with pine trees and a gate. Below that was a list of violations, with unapproved wooden structure highlighted in yellow. I went inside and called my buddy Tom, who worked as a real estate attorney in Denver. After explaining the situation, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Jake, tell me you are joking," Tom finally said. I wish I was. This woman just showed up and told me I have 30 days to demolish my grandfather's cabin or they will do it for me. "Okay, first thing, do not panic. Second thing, do not touch that cabin. Do not make any modifications, do not take anything down, nothing. I need you to gather every piece of documentation you have about that property. Deed, property surveys, tax records, everything. I pulled out the old filing cabinet where I kept all my important papers. I have got the original deed from 1952, property tax records going back decades, even some old photographs of my grandfather building the place. Perfect. That is exactly what we need. Listen, if your property genuinely predates this HOA, and you never voluntarily signed any agreement to join them, they have no authority over you. But we need to prove it, and we need to prove it fast if they are serious about that 30-day timeline. What should I do? Can you come to my office Monday morning? Bring everything you have. We are going to need to file a response and possibly a restraining order if they try to move forward with any demolition plans. I spent the rest of the weekend going through every box, every drawer, every corner of my cabin looking for documentation. My grandfather had been meticulous about record keeping, and I found construction receipts from 1952, photographs showing the building process, even a journal where he detailed working on the cabin. I also found the original property survey from 1951, clearly showing the boundaries of my land. Monday morning, I drove down to Denver with a box full of papers. Tom's office was in a modern building downtown, the kind of place that made me uncomfortable with its glass walls and minimalist furniture. Tom met me in the lobby, and we went up to his office on the 14th floor. "Let me see what you brought," he said, clearing space on his conference table. I laid everything out. Tom spent the next hour going through each document, occasionally taking photos or making notes on his laptop. Finally, he sat back and smiled. "Jake, this is even better than I thought. Your property is not just outside the HOA's jurisdiction, it predates the entire development. Look at this." He pulled out a map on his computer showing the Whispering Pines development. The HOA was established in 2019 when this development was created. But your property is not part of that development. It is a separate parcel that was here first. So they have no authority over me. None whatsoever. Your property is what we call a legal non-conforming use. It existed before any zoning or HOA regulations were put in place. As long as you did not voluntarily sign an agreement to join the HOA, they cannot force you to comply with their rules. Relief washed over me. So I just tell them to back off. Tom's expression turned more serious. Not quite that simple. We need to respond formally to their violation notice. We will file what is called a declaratory judgment action, asking the court to officially declare that your property is not subject to HOA authority. We will also want to get a temporary restraining order preventing them from taking any action against your cabin while this is being resolved. How long will that take? Could be a few months. Courts do not move fast, but the restraining order should protect you in the meantime. Over the next week, Tom prepared all the legal documents. We filed the declaratory judgment action in the Boulder County District Court, along with a motion for a temporary restraining order. The hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, Patricia was not sitting idle. I started receiving daily emails from the HOA, each one more threatening than the last. They claimed I was lowering property values, creating a fire hazard, and violating community standards. On day 10 of my supposed 30-day compliance period, I received a letter informing me that the HOA had hired a demolition company and would be exercising their right to remove the structure if I did not comply. I forwarded everything to Tom, who assured me this was actually helping our case by showing how aggressive and overreaching the HOA was being. The hearing for the temporary restraining order was held in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and stale coffee. Judge Margaret Reynolds presided, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Tom and I sat at one table while Patricia and the HOA's attorney, a thin man named Gerald Fitzpatrick, sat at the other. Tom presented our case first, laying out the timeline of my property ownership, the documentation showing the cabin was built in 1952, and the fact that I had never signed any agreement to join the HOA. He showed the original property surveys demonstrating that my land was a separate parcel from the Whispering Pines development. Your Honor, Tom concluded, Mr. Carter's property is a legal non-conforming use that predates the HOA by almost 70 years. The HOA has no authority over his property, and their threats of demolition constitute illegal interference with his property rights. We are asking for a temporary restraining order to prevent any action against the cabin while the declaratory judgment action proceeds. Gerald Fitzpatrick stood up, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, while Mr. Carter's cabin may predate our HOA, the property itself falls within the boundaries of the Whispering Pines development. When the development was created, all properties within those boundaries became subject to HOA authority, regardless of when they were built. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. Mr. Fitzpatrick, did Mr. Carter ever sign an agreement to join your HOA? No, Your Honor, but did he purchase his property after the HOA was established? No, Your Honor. However, our position is that the HOA boundaries encompass his property, and therefore, Mr. Fitzpatrick, you cannot simply draw boundaries around someone else's property and claim authority over it. That is not how property law works. Judge Reynolds flipped through the documents in front of her. I am looking at the property survey from 1951, clearly showing Mr. Carter's property as a separate parcel. I am looking at continuous ownership records going back over 70 years. I am looking at no evidence whatsoever that Mr. Carter voluntarily joined your association. Patricia leaned over and whispered something urgently to Gerald. He nodded and stood again. Your Honor, our concern is primarily safety. Wooden structures pose a significant fire risk, and Judge Reynolds cut him off. Mr. Fitzpatrick, half the houses in Colorado are made of wood. That argument holds no water. Here is what I am going to do. I am granting the temporary restraining order. The Whispering Pines HOA is prohibited from taking any action against Mr. Carter's cabin, including but not limited to demolition, fines, or any other interference with his property rights. This order remains in effect until the declaratory judgment action is resolved. We will schedule a full hearing on the merits for 60 days from now. I felt Tom relax beside me. Patricia, however, looked like she was about to explode. Her face had turned an impressive shade of red, and she was gripping the edge of the table hard enough to turn her knuckles white. As we left the courtroom, Patricia intercepted us in the hallway. This is not over, Mr. Carter. You may have fooled the judge today, but the Whispering Pines HOA will not tolerate your blatant disregard for community standards. Tom stepped between us. Miss Thornberry, my client is under no obligation to speak with you. Any further communication should go through me, and I would strongly advise your association to respect the court's order. Violating a restraining order is a serious matter. Patricia glared at us both before storming off, her heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. That went well, I said once she was out of earshot. Tom grinned. Better than well. The judge saw right through their arguments. As long as we keep documenting everything and you do not do anything to antagonize them, we should be fine. I should have known it would not be that simple. 2 weeks after the restraining order was issued, I came home from work to find a notice taped to my cabin door. It was from the Boulder County Building Department, stating that they had received a complaint about unpermitted structures on my property and would be conducting an inspection the following week. I called Tom immediately. They are going after me through the county now. Send me a photo of the notice, Tom said. I could hear him typing in the background. Okay, this is clearly Patricia's doing, but it is actually not a bad thing. A county inspection will confirm that your cabin is structurally sound and has been here since 1952. Just make sure everything is accessible for the inspector. The inspector showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. His name was Robert Chen, and unlike Patricia, he seemed like a reasonable person. He walked around my cabin with a clipboard, checking the foundation, looking at the roof, examining the electrical and plumbing. "This is good work," he said, running his hand along one of the log walls. "They do not build them like this anymore. When did you say this was constructed?" "My grandfather built it in 1952. I have all the original documentation if you need to see it." Robert made some notes. "I would like to see that, actually. We have been getting complaints from the HOA about this property, but from what I am seeing, everything is solid. The craftsmanship is excellent, the structure is sound, and honestly, these old log cabins are often more durable than modern construction." I showed him the photographs of my grandfather building the cabin, the construction receipts, and the original property records. Robert spent a long time looking through everything, comparing dates and details. "Mr. Carter, I am going to be honest with you. This inspection was requested by the HOA as part of what looks like a harassment campaign, but there is nothing wrong with your cabin. It is structurally sound, it meets all safety standards, and it clearly predates any current regulations. I'm going to file a report stating that no violations were found and that the structure is a legal non-conforming use." "Thank you," I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Robert handed me a card. "If the HOA keeps harassing you, give me a call. We do not appreciate people misusing the inspection process to settle personal disputes." That should have been the end of it, but Patricia was nothing if not persistent. A week later, I received a letter from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment claiming that my property had been reported for potential environmental violations, specifically regarding my septic system. Tom was less amused this time. "She is just throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, but each false report she files is actually building our case for harassment. Keep every letter, every email, every piece of communication." The environmental inspector came out and found nothing wrong with my septic system, which had been properly maintained for decades. The fire department was next, responding to Patricia's claim that my cabin was a fire hazard. The fire marshal took one look at my property, noted the defensive space I maintained around the cabin, checked my fire extinguishers, and declared everything in compliance with wildfire safety regulations. "You know," the fire marshal said as he was leaving, "whoever filed this complaint clearly has never been out here. Your property is actually better maintained than most of the houses in that fancy development down the road." By this point, word had gotten around the county about what was happening. I started receiving calls from my neighbors, people who lived on properties similar to mine, offering their support. An older couple named Frank and Dorothy Morrison, who lived about 2 miles down the road, invited me over for dinner. "We have been dealing with that HOA nonsense too," Frank said, passing me a bowl of mashed potatoes. "They keep sending us letters saying our barn is an eyesore." "Our barn has been there since 1947. Dorothy nodded vigorously. "Patricia Thornberry is a menace. She moved here from California 3 years ago, bought one of those cookie-cutter houses in Whispering Pines, and immediately started trying to turn this whole area into some kind of suburban nightmare. She does not understand that people live up here because we like the rural character." "Has she tried to take any action against your barn?" I asked. "Not yet, but she keeps threatening. We heard about what happened to you and we are watching your case closely. If you win, it sets a precedent for the rest of us." The full hearing on the declaratory judgment was scheduled for early April. Tom spent weeks preparing, gathering testimony from property law experts, researching similar cases, and building what he called an airtight argument that my property was not subject to HOA authority. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept thinking about my grandfather building this cabin with his own hands, how proud he had been of it, how he had brought my grandmother here on their honeymoon. This was not just a piece of property, it was my family's history. The courtroom was packed the next morning. News of the case had spread. and several other property owners from the area showed up to watch. Patricia sat at the defendant's table with Gerald Fitzpatrick and two other people I did not recognize, probably HOA board members. Judge Reynolds entered and we all stood. She looked over the courtroom with those sharp eyes, then settled in her seat. "All right, let us get started. Mr. Harris, you may present your case." Tom stood and launched into a comprehensive presentation of our position. He walked the judge through the timeline, starting with my grandfather purchasing the land in 1951, building the cabin in 1952, and continuous family ownership since then. He presented the property surveys showing my land as a separate parcel, the tax records showing I had paid property taxes continuously, and the original deed with no mention of any HOA restrictions. "Your Honor, this is a clear case of an HOA overstepping its authority," Tom said. Mr. Carter never signed any agreement to join the Whispering Pines HOA. His property was here first, long before the development was created. The HOA cannot simply extend its boundaries to encompass existing properties without the owner's consent. That would violate fundamental principles of property law and constitutional protections against taking private property without due process. Tom then presented testimony from a property law professor at the University of Colorado, who explained the concept of legal nonconforming uses and why they were protected under law. He also had testimony from a surveyor who confirmed that my property was a distinct parcel, not part of the Whispering Pines development. When Tom finished, Gerald Fitzpatrick stood up for the defense. His argument focused on claiming that when the Whispering Pines development was created, the county had designated a larger area as subject to HOA governance, and my property fell within that area. "Your Honor, the Whispering Pines HOA was established with the approval of Boulder County to maintain certain standards across a designated area. While Mr. Carter's cabin may predate our association, the property itself falls within the boundaries of that designated area." Judge Reynolds interrupted him. "Mr. Fitzpatrick, do you have any documentation showing that Boulder County designated Mr. Carter's property as part of your HOA's jurisdiction?" Gerald shuffled through his papers. "Your Honor, we have the original development plan, which shows the boundaries of the Whispering Pines area. But does that development plan specifically include Mr. Carter's property? And more importantly, was Mr. Carter notified of this and given an opportunity to object?" I do not have documentation of specific notification to Mr. Carter. So your association drew up boundaries that included his property, never notified him, never obtained his consent, and now claims authority over him. Is that correct?" Gerald looked uncomfortable. "Your Honor, our position is that the boundaries are valid regardless of notification." "That position is legally baseless, Mr. Fitzpatrick. You cannot unilaterally claim jurisdiction over someone's property without their knowledge or consent. That is not how property rights work in this country." Patricia stood up suddenly. "Your Honor, if I may, you may not," Judge Reynolds said firmly. "You are not an attorney and you are not recognized to speak in this proceeding. Please sit down." Patricia reluctantly sat, but I could see her fuming. The hearing continued for another 2 hours. Tom presented more evidence, including the reports from the county building inspector, the environmental inspector, and the fire marshal, all showing that my property was in full compliance with actual regulations and that Patricia's complaints had been baseless harassment. Finally, Judge Reynolds called for a recess to review the evidence. We all filed out into the hallway and I felt Tom's hand on my shoulder. "That went really well. The judge is clearly on our side. Do you think we will win?" "I would be shocked if we did not. They have no legal leg to stand on." After an hour, we were called back into the courtroom. Judge Reynolds had several pages of notes in front of her. "I have reviewed all the evidence and testimony presented here today," she began. "This is actually a straightforward case despite the attempts to complicate it. The law is clear." Mr. Carter owns a property that was legally established in 1951, with a cabin built in 1952. He has maintained continuous ownership, paid property taxes, and maintained the property in good condition. The Whispering Pines HOA was not established until 2019, almost 70 years after Mr. Carter's property was created. She looked directly at Patricia and Gerald. The HOA's claim that it can unilaterally extend its jurisdiction over a pre-existing property without the owner's consent is without legal merit. You cannot draw boundaries around someone else's property and claim authority over it. That would violate fundamental property rights protected by both state and federal law. I felt a surge of relief, but Judge Reynolds was not done. Furthermore, I am troubled by the evidence of harassment presented here. Mr. Carter has been subjected to multiple false complaints, baseless inspection requests, and threatening communications, all apparently orchestrated by the HOA in an attempt to force him into compliance with rules that do not apply to him. This conduct is unacceptable. Patricia started to stand, but Gerald pulled her back down. Therefore, I am issuing the following orders. First, I declare that the property located at 447 Timber Ridge Road is not subject to the authority of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. The HOA has no jurisdiction over this property and no right to enforce its rules or regulations against Mr. Carter. Second, I am making the temporary restraining order permanent. The HOA is permanently prohibited from taking any action against Mr. Carter's cabin or property. Third, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Carter's attorney fees in this matter, as this case should never have been necessary. Finally, I am issuing a warning. If this court receives any evidence of further harassment of Mr. Carter by the HOA, I will consider sanctions, including contempt charges. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. It was over. I had won. Tom shook my hand, grinning ear to ear. Congratulations, Jake, your cabin is safe. I looked over at Patricia, who was staring straight ahead with a look of utter disbelief on her face. Gerald was packing up his briefcase quickly, clearly wanting to get out of there. As we left the courtroom, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But I should have known Patricia was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. 3 weeks after the court ruling, I was working in my shed when I heard trucks coming up the road. Heavy trucks, from the sound of it. I walked out to see what was going on and froze. 2 large construction vehicles were turning onto my driveway, followed by Patricia's white Lexus. I ran toward them, waving my arms. "Hey, stop, you cannot be here." The lead truck stopped and a man in a hard hat climbed out. "Are you Jake Carter?" "Yes, and you need to leave." There is a court order protecting this property. Patricia got out of her car, and I noticed she had that same aggressive expression she had worn the first time we met. "Mr. Carter, these gentlemen are here to assess the demolition requirements for your structure." Demolition. "Are you out of your mind? The judge issued a permanent restraining order. You have no authority here." The construction foreman looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, if there is a court order, we cannot proceed." Patricia pulled out some papers. "The HOA board has authorized this action. We have every right to remove structures that violate our safety standards." I pulled out my phone. "I am calling my attorney and the sheriff. You are violating a court order right now." The foreman held up his hands. "Okay, we are not getting in the middle of this. Come on, guys, let us get out of here." He climbed back into his truck and both vehicles started backing down my driveway. Patricia turned on me, her face red with anger. "You think you have won, but you have not. That cabin is a blight on this community, and one way or another it is coming down. You were in that courtroom. You heard the judge. You have no authority over my property, and right now you are trespassing. Leave before I call the police." "This is not over," Patricia hissed, then got back in her Lexus and drove away. I immediately called Tom. "She just showed up with demolition equipment." "What? Are you serious?" "Dead serious. She tried to bring construction crews onto my property to demolish the cabin." The workers left when I mentioned the court order, but Patricia is completely ignoring the judge's ruling. Tom was quiet for a moment. Okay, this is serious. She just violated a court order. I am going to file an emergency motion for contempt. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? Absolutely. That night, I set up security cameras around my property. If Patricia was going to keep trying something, I wanted evidence. Tom had recommended it weeks ago, and I was kicking myself for not doing it sooner. The next morning, I drove to Denver with video from my phone showing Patricia and the construction trucks. Tom watched it twice, shaking his head. She is either incredibly stupid or incredibly arrogant, probably both. This is a clear violation of the court's order. We filed an emergency motion for contempt that afternoon. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Tom also sent a letter to the Boulder County Sheriff's Office informing them of the situation and asking them to keep an eye on my property. The contempt hearing was even more packed than the previous one. Apparently, word had spread about Patricia's attempted demolition, and people were curious to see what would happen. Judge Reynolds looked distinctly unpleased when she entered the courtroom. "Mr. Harris, you filed an emergency motion for contempt. Explain." Tom presented the video from my phone showing Patricia bringing construction crews to my property just 3 weeks after the court had issued a permanent restraining order. He also had affidavits from the construction foreman, who confirmed that Patricia had hired them to demolish my cabin and had not mentioned anything about a court order. Judge Reynolds watched the video with a deepening frown. When it finished, she turned to Patricia and Gerald. "Miss Thornberry, stand up." Patricia stood, trying to maintain her composure. "Did you attempt to have Mr. Carter's cabin demolished on the date shown in this video? Your Honor, I was simply trying to enforce the HOA's legitimate safety concerns. Answer the question. Yes or no?" "Did you bring demolition equipment to Mr. Carter's property?" Patricia hesitated. "Yes, but were you present in this courtroom 3 weeks ago when I issued a permanent restraining order prohibiting you from taking any action against Mr. Carter's property?" "Yes, Your Honor, but I believed." "What you believed is irrelevant. You violated a direct court order. That is contempt of court, Miss Thornberry." Judge Reynolds looked at Gerald. "Mr. Fitzpatrick, did you advise your client that attempting to demolish Mr. Carter's cabin would violate my order?" Gerald looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Yes, Your Honor. I specifically told the HOA board not to take any action." So Miss Thornberry proceeded despite being warned by both the court and her own attorney. Judge Reynolds made some notes. "Miss Thornberry, I find you in contempt of court. I am imposing a fine of $5,000 to be paid within 30 days. If you violate my order again in any way, I will consider jail time. Do you understand?" Patricia's face had gone pale. "Yes, Your Honor." "Furthermore, I am ordering you to personally stay at least 500 feet away from Mr. Carter's property at all times, except when traveling on public roads. The HOA as an entity is prohibited from any contact with Mr. Carter except through his attorney. Any violation of these orders will result in immediate arrest. Am I making myself clear?" "Yes, Your Honor." As we left the courtroom, I finally felt like maybe this nightmare was over. A $5,000 fine and a personal restraining order should be enough to make Patricia back off. I was wrong. 2 months later, I came home from work to find my driveway blocked by a county road maintenance truck. A crew was setting up to do some work, and I pulled over to ask what was going on. "Hey guys, what is this about?" I called out to the nearest worker. He looked at his clipboard. "We got a work order to close this driveway. Apparently it is not up to county standards and needs to be reconstructed." My stomach dropped. "Can I see that work order?" He handed me his clipboard. The request had come from the Whispering Pines HOA, claiming that my driveway was a safety hazard and needed immediate attention. At the bottom, I saw Patricia Thornberry's signature. "This is harassment," I said. "The HOA has no authority over my property. There is a court order." The crew chief came over. Look, buddy, we just do what the work orders say. If you have a problem, you need to take it up with the county. I called Tom immediately, then called the Boulder County Road Department. After being transferred 3 times, I finally got someone who could help. I explained the situation and sent them copies of the court orders. Mr. Carter, it looks like this work order was submitted fraudulently. The HOA does not have authority to request work on your private driveway. I am going to cancel this work order immediately and flag the HOA's account. If they submit any more false work orders, we will take legal action. The crew left, looking annoyed at having wasted their time. I sent all the documentation to Tom, who was now thoroughly fed up with Patricia's antics. This is beyond harassment at this point, Tom said. She is filing false reports with county agencies. That is actually a crime. I think we need to go to the sheriff. The next day, Tom and I met with a detective at the Boulder County Sheriff's Office. Detective Sarah Brennan listened to our story, reviewed all the documentation, and looked at the timeline of Patricia's actions. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Detective Brennan said. After losing in court, being found in contempt, fined $5,000, and being personally restrained from coming near your property, this woman has continued to file false complaints and work orders in an attempt to harass you. That is correct, Tom said. We have documented at least 7 separate incidents of false reports to county agencies after the contempt finding. Detective Brennan made notes. This could qualify as criminal harassment under Colorado law. It could also potentially be fraud, since she is making false reports to government agencies. Let me look into this further. I may need to interview some witnesses and gather more evidence. Over the next few weeks, Detective Brennan conducted her investigation. She interviewed the construction foreman who Patricia had hired, the county inspectors who had responded to false complaints, and several of my neighbors. She also subpoenaed emails from the HOA showing that Patricia had been coordinating these harassment efforts. One afternoon in late June, I was sitting on my porch when I saw 2 sheriff's vehicles coming up the road. They turned into the Whispering Pines development. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was Detective Brennan. Mr. Carter, I wanted to let you know that we have just arrested Patricia Thornberry on charges of criminal harassment and filing false reports with a government agency. Both are misdemeanors, but given the pattern of behavior and the violation of court orders, the district attorney is taking this seriously. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved that Patricia was finally facing consequences. Part of me just felt exhausted from the whole ordeal. Thank you, Detective. I appreciate all your work on this. You may be called to testify at the trial, so keep that in mind. But hopefully this sends a message that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Patricia's arrest made the local news. The headline in the Boulder Daily Camera read, HOA President Arrested for Harassment Campaign Against Property Owner. The article detailed the entire saga, from Patricia's initial demand that I demolish my cabin to her arrest for filing false reports after multiple court orders. The response from the community was overwhelming. I received calls and letters from dozens of people who had experienced similar issues with aggressive HOAs. Frank and Dorothy Morrison came by with a bottle of wine to celebrate. Even people from the Whispering Pines development reached out, apologizing for Patricia's behavior and saying they had no idea what she had been doing. Patricia's criminal trial was scheduled for September. In the meantime, the Whispering Pines HOA held an emergency board meeting and voted to remove her as president. They also issued a formal apology and agreed to drop all claims against my property. The trial itself was almost anticlimactic. The evidence against Patricia was overwhelming. The prosecution presented the court orders, the false reports, the testimony of county officials, and the emails showing Patricia had deliberately filed false complaints to harass me. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she was simply trying to protect the community, but Judge Thompson was not having it. "Miss Thornberry, you were given multiple opportunities to accept the court's ruling and move on," Judge Thompson said during sentencing. "Instead, you escalated your harassment, violated court orders, and wasted government resources by filing false reports. This behavior is unacceptable." Patricia was sentenced to 6 months probation, a $1,000 fine, 100 hours of community service, and ordered to have no contact with me or my property. She was also required to attend anger management classes. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I felt like I could finally breathe. The nightmare was over. My cabin was safe, Patricia was out of the picture, and I could go back to living my life in peace. But the story does not quite end there. A few weeks after the trial, I received a letter from the new president of the Whispering Pines HOA, a reasonable-sounding man named David Chen. He apologized again for Patricia's actions and asked if I would be willing to meet with the HOA board. I was hesitant, but Tom advised me to at least hear them out. We met at a coffee shop in Boulder, neutral territory. David was there with 2 other board members, a woman named Lisa and a man named Marcus. "Mr. Carter, thank you for agreeing to meet with us," David began. "We want to start by apologizing again for everything that happened. Patricia's actions do not represent the values of our community, and we are deeply embarrassed by her behavior." "I appreciate that," I said cautiously. Lisa spoke up. "We have also been doing some research into the history of this area. We did not realize when we bought into this development that there were several properties like yours that predated the HOA. We were operating under misinformation provided by Patricia." Marcus added, "We want to make this right. We have revised our bylaws to explicitly acknowledge that properties predating the HOA are not subject to our authority. We have also implemented new procedures to prevent this kind of overreach from happening again." David leaned forward. "We are not asking you to join the HOA or submit to any of our rules. We just want to be good neighbors. And honestly, after learning about your cabin's history, we think it is pretty cool. Your grandfather built that with his own hands." I found myself relaxing a bit. He did. Took him 2 years, working mostly on weekends. We talked for over an hour. They asked about the cabin's history, and I showed them some of the old photographs. They told me about some of the positive things the HOA was doing, like organizing community events and maintaining the common areas in the development. By the end of the conversation, I felt like maybe we could coexist peacefully after all. As summer turned to fall, life finally returned to normal. I worked on fixing up some areas of the cabin that needed attention, enjoying the process without the constant stress of wondering when Patricia would strike next. Frank and Dorothy invited me to a neighborhood barbecue where I met more of the old-timers who had been living in the area for decades. One Saturday in October, I was raking leaves when a car pulled up. For a moment, my heart jumped, but it was not Patricia's white Lexus. It was a blue Honda, and a young couple got out, looking nervous. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Are you Jake Carter?" "That is me." "My name is Emma, and this is my husband Ryan. We read about your story in the newspaper. We are thinking about buying a property a few miles from here, and it is a similar situation. The land has an old farmhouse on it from the 1940s, but there is a new HOA claiming they have authority over it. I invited them up to the porch, and we talked for a while. I shared Tom's contact information and told them about the legal arguments that had worked in my case. They were young, probably in their late 20s, and reminded me a bit of myself at that age. "The thing is," Ryan said, "we really love that property. It has history, character. We do not want some cookie-cutter modern house, but we are scared of ending up in the same nightmare you went through." It was not fun, I admitted, but it was worth fighting for. This cabin is not just wood and nails. It is my family's story. If that farmhouse means something to you, do not let an HOA bully you away from it. Emma smiled. "Thank you, that means a lot." After they left, I sat on my porch watching the sun set through the pine trees. The same view my grandfather had enjoyed 70 years ago. The same view I had grown up with. The same view I hoped to enjoy for many more years to come. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Just got word that Patricia violated her probation by sending angry emails to the new HOA board complaining about the policy changes. She is going back before the judge next week. Thought you would want to know. I shook my head. Some people never learn. But that was Patricia's problem now, not mine. As fall deepened and the first snow began to dust the mountains, I spent my evenings by the fireplace, reading through my grandfather's old journals. He had written about the challenges of building the cabin, the satisfaction of creating something with his own hands, the joy of watching his family grow up in this special place. In one entry from 1953, he wrote, "This cabin is more than shelter. It is a testament to perseverance, to the value of hard work, to the importance of standing your ground when you know you are right. Whatever challenges the future brings, this cabin will stand." He had no idea how prophetic those words would be. The cabin had stood through blizzards and forest fires, through economic downturns and family struggles. And now it had survived Patricia Thornberry and the Whispering Pines HOA. I started my own journal that night, documenting the entire saga for future generations. Maybe someday my grandchildren would sit in this same spot, reading about the time their grandfather had to fight to protect their family's legacy. Maybe they would face their own challenges, their own Patricias, and maybe this story would give them the courage to stand their ground. Christmas came, and the cabin looked like something from a postcard, covered in snow with smoke curling from the chimney. David Chen and some of the folks from Whispering Pines actually came by with cookies and an invitation to their holiday party. I declined the party but appreciated the gesture. We were not friends exactly, but we had reached a peaceful understanding. Tom came up for New Year's Eve, bringing his wife and kids. We grilled steaks, drank whiskey, and watched the stars from the porch. His youngest daughter, Maya, was fascinated by the cabin's history and made me tell her all the stories about my grandfather building it. "So you actually had to go to court to keep your house?" she asked, wide-eyed. I did. But that is what you do when something is important, you fight for it. Tom raised his glass, to fighting the good fight, and to stubborn cabin owners who refuse to back down. We clinked glasses as the clock struck midnight, welcoming a new year. A year that would hopefully be much quieter than the last one. January brought deep snow and cold temperatures. I spent my days working remotely from the cabin, video conferencing with colleagues while sitting next to the fireplace. My boss had been incredibly understanding throughout the whole ordeal, and I made sure to put an extra effort to show my appreciation. One afternoon in February, I received a certified letter from the Colorado Bar Association. My stomach dropped, wondering what fresh hell this could be, but when I opened it, I was shocked. It was a notification that Gerald Fitzpatrick had been censured for ethical violations related to his representation of the Whispering Pines HOA. Apparently, the bar had found that he had not adequately advised his client about the legal risks of their actions and had allowed Patricia to proceed with violations of court orders. I called Tom to tell him. "Gerald got censured. Did you know about this?" "I heard it was under review, but I did not know they had decided. That is significant. A censure is a public reprimand. It will be on his record permanently." "Do you think he deserved it?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, yeah, he knew Patricia was violating court orders. He should have withdrawn from representing the HOA if she would not listen to his advice. Instead, he kept taking their money and showing up in court to defend the indefensible. As winter gave way to spring, I started thinking about what I wanted to do with the cabin long term. I was 42 years old, single, no kids. If something happened to me, what would happen to this place? I did not want to see it fall into the wrong hands or get torn down after I was gone. I talked to Tom about setting up a trust to preserve the cabin. We worked out an arrangement where the property would be maintained by a trust after my death, with the goal of keeping it in the family Or, if no family wanted it, donating it to a historical preservation society. "You know," Tom said as we finalized the paperwork, "when you first called me about this, I thought it would be a simple property dispute. I had no idea it would turn into this whole saga." "Neither did I. I was just trying to drink my coffee in peace." "Well, you have done something important here. You have set a precedent that is going to help other people in similar situations. I have already had 3 other clients come to me with HOA disputes, all citing your case." That made me feel good. If my struggle could help protect other people's property rights, then it was worth it. In April, I got an unexpected visitor. Detective Brennan pulled up in an unmarked car, and I felt a moment of panic before remembering I had not done anything wrong. "Mr. Carter, do you have a few minutes?" She asked. "Of course, is everything okay?" "Everything is fine. I actually came by to let you know that Patricia Thornberry has been sentenced to 30 days in jail for violating her probation. I wanted you to hear it from me before it hit the news." 30 days. What did she do? "She continued to file false complaints, not just about you, but about several other properties in the area. She also made threatening phone calls to members of the HOA board who voted to remove her. The judge had had enough." I did not know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me just felt sad that it had come to this. "Thank you for letting me know. There is one more thing. After she serves her time, she will be on probation for another year. One of the conditions is that she cannot serve on any HOA board and cannot file any complaints with county agencies without approval from her probation officer. Essentially, she has been defanged." After Detective Brennan left, I sat on my porch thinking about Patricia. What had driven her to such extremes? Was it really just about property values and community standards, or was there something deeper going on? Maybe she was unhappy with her own life and trying to control everything around her. Maybe she was just a bully who had never faced consequences before. I would probably never know. What I did know was that my cabin was safe. The legal precedent was established. The courts had firmly ruled that HOAs could not simply extend their authority over properties that predated them without the owner's consent. Future property owners in similar situations would have my case to cite. Summer came again, and I spent my weekends hiking the mountains and fishing in the streams near my property. Frank and Dorothy had me over for dinner regularly, and I started dating a woman named Sarah who worked at the library in Boulder. She loved the cabin and its history, and we spent long evenings on the porch talking about books and life. One Saturday in July, Sarah and I were having breakfast on the porch when we saw a group of people hiking on the public trail that ran near my property. One of them waved, and I waved back. "Do you get a lot of hikers through here?" Sarah asked. "More in the summer." The trail connects to some popular spots higher up the mountain. One of the hikers, a man in his 50s, approached the edge of my property. "Excuse me, are you Jake Carter?" "I am." His face lit up. "I thought so. I read about your case. I am a property rights attorney in Denver, and I have been using your case in presentations about HOA overreach. Would you mind if I took a picture of your cabin? I promise I will stay on the trail." I laughed. "Sure, go ahead." As he took his photos, Sarah looked at me. "Does this happen a lot?" "You would be surprised. I have become sort of a minor celebrity in property rights circles." The hiker thanked me and rejoined his group. Sarah shook her head, smiling. "You are the most reluctant celebrity I have ever met." As the summer progressed, I started thinking about writing my own book about the experience. Not a legal treatise, but a personal story about why property rights matter, why history matters, why it is important to stand up to bullies even when it is hard. I reached out to a few literary agents, and to my surprise, several were interested. By the fall, I had a book deal. I spent my evenings after work writing, trying to capture not just the legal battle but the emotional toll it had taken, the moments of doubt, the small victories, the community support that had kept me going. Sarah helped with editing, and Tom reviewed all the legal sections to make sure I got the details right. The book came out the following spring, titled Grandfather's Cabin: One Man's Fight Against HOA Overreach. It did not become a bestseller, but it found an audience. I did readings at bookstores and libraries, and I met dozens of people who were fighting their own battles against unreasonable HOAs. One woman at a reading in Denver told me through tears that my story had given her the courage to fight back against her HOA, which was trying to force her to remove a vegetable garden her late husband had planted. A man in Colorado Springs said my case had helped him save his workshop, which the HOA claimed was an eyesore. Each story reminded me why the fight had been worth it. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I worked my remote job during the week, spent weekends with Sarah exploring the mountains, and slowly worked on improvements to the cabin. I repaired the roof using the same techniques my grandfather had used, replaced some worn boards on the porch, and updated the plumbing while preserving the cabin's historic character. David Chen and I developed an unlikely friendship. He would stop by occasionally to chat, and I learned that he was actually a preservation advocate who had been horrified when he learned what Patricia had been doing. Under his leadership, the Whispering Pines HOA became more reasonable, focusing on maintaining common areas rather than micromanaging individual properties. 3 years after the initial confrontation with Patricia, I was invited to speak at a property rights conference in Denver. The audience was full of attorneys, property owners, and activists fighting against various forms of government and HOA overreach. I told my story, emphasizing the importance of documentation, good legal representation, and community support. During the question and answer session, a young woman in the back raised her hand. "Mr. Carter, what would you say to someone who is facing a similar situation but feels overwhelmed and wants to give up?" I thought about that morning when Patricia first drove up my driveway, how my peaceful coffee had been interrupted, how I had felt a moment of panic at the thought of losing my grandfather's cabin. I would say that standing up for what is right is never easy. There will be moments when you want to give up, when the stress feels like too much, when you wonder if it is worth it. But some things are worth fighting for. Whether it is a cabin built by your grandfather, a garden planted by your spouse, or just the principle that no one should be able to bully you off your own property if it matters to you, then it is worth the fight. You do not have to do it alone. Find a good attorney, document everything, reach out to your community, and do not let anyone tell you that you are being unreasonable for defending your rights. The room erupted in applause, and I felt a swell of emotion. My grandfather would have been proud. That evening, as I drove back to my cabin, I thought about how much had changed in 3 years. Patricia was out of my life, serving out her probation in obscurity. The cabin was legally protected, with clear precedent establishing its status. I had written a book, become an advocate, and found a community of people who shared my values, but the cabin itself had not changed. The logs my grandfather had cut and shaped were still solid. The foundation he had poured was still level. The view from the porch was still breathtaking. That was the point, really. Some things should not change. Some things should be preserved, protected, and passed down to future generations. As I pulled into my driveway, Sarah was waiting on the porch. She had moved in 6 months earlier, and we were talking about getting married. She loved the cabin as much as I did and understood why it was worth fighting for. "How was the conference?" she called out. "Good, really good. I will tell you all about it." We sat on the porch as the sun set, the same way my grandfather and grandmother had sat 70 years earlier, the same way I hoped our children and grandchildren would sit 70 years in the future. The cabin had survived storms, fire seasons, legal battles, and one very determined HOA president. It would survive whatever came next, because some things are built to last, some things are worth fighting for, and some things, like my grandfather's cabin, become more than just wood and nails. They become a testament to perseverance, to standing your ground, to knowing when to fight and having the courage to see it through. The wooden structure that Patricia Thornberry had tried so hard to destroy still stood, as solid and proud as the day it was built. And it would stand for generations to come, a reminder that property rights matter, history matters, and sometimes, one person standing up to a bully can make all the difference.